Hello, welcome back to the Ludiverse. I am your host, Jay, and my guest today, would you care to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rayne, and today I'll be talking about sexual little space.
Okay. What does sexual little space mean exactly?
Sexual little space is honestly different for every little. For me, it is a way to take back control over my trauma as a child. I suffered from CSA trauma, and for me, it's a way to take back control.
I've heard of similar situations, and well, some people have said that it's embracing the abuse, not overcoming it. What do you think about that?
So that's something I actually struggle with myself. I only recently realized that my abuse was abuse this year. So I'm currently working through that now. And for me, I struggle with accepting my age play kink. It can sometimes cause me distress because, there's such this stigma around it. And I think that's something that, we need to get away from that stigma.
Oh, absolutely. Even in a lot of the Facebook groups and stuff that I'm in, where they're all like, "We don't kink shame. We're kink positive." If somebody brings up, age play, everything gets kind of quiet.
Yep. And no one mentions that they have an age play kink. It's just not talked about. Or if it is talked about, it's talked about like it's a hard limit for people, which I can understand.
Right. And not every kink is for everybody, but as long as nobody's getting hurt, what's the problem?
And that's the point, is age play is for adults. That is who it's for. Kink is for adults. There shouldn't be minors in kink spaces. And as a little, I'm not a child. I'm not a kid. I am an adult who is, embracing my inner child. My littleness is part of my personality.
So when you do your age role play, how far back do you go? Or do you like teenager, childhood, toddler? Some people are into the diapers.
I personally am not into the diapers. My little space was usually for about 2 to 9, so it can be anywhere between there. But for the most part, I'm usually the younger age. It's not always sexual though. Sometimes I'm just little to be little.
How do you go into age play, which is a kink lifestyle, and not be sexual? I I've heard, but in your words, how would you put it?
For me, it reclaiming that inner child. It's, coloring, it's watching Disney movies, watching cartoons, playing with my stuffies, talking to my daddy, like just being acting like a child. Like I didn't have a good childhood. I was in foster care. So for me, it's getting that childhood back.
Oh, okay. Well, there are people who do all of those things. The Disney movies, the coloring, stuffed animals, and it has nothing to do with any kind of kink or fetish. So, what exactly separates the way you do it from, the way somebody that's not into kink does it?
Ooh, good question. I think for me is that there's always this underlying sexual bit to it. It could always become sexual at any moment. It's not always sexual right then and there, but could become sexual. And I have consented to that. I think people outside of kink who do it, they don't have any of those sexual thoughts, those sexual feelings when they're doing these kinds of, watching the Disney movies and coloring and playing with their stuffy and talking to their partner and that kind of thing.
Okay, well, that makes sense. So, when did you decide that the age play lifestyle was one that you were going to embrace rather than try to avoid due to your past trauma?
When I got with my current partner, he also has an age play kink due to trauma. And, I learned very early on in this relationship that we were both into kink, which, was kind of a requirement for me at this point because I had been in vanilla relationships and they just they didn't work out. I needed that kink aspect. For me, kink is such a big part of my life. It's who I am. It's part of who I am. Why deny it? So I embraced it when I got into a relationship with my current partner.
Well, it's good that you have a partner who, accepts you as you are.
Oh yeah, no, he's great. He's so helpful, especially when, I go down those rabbit holes of, questioning whether or not I'm a good person because of my age play kink, because, that is something that I and a lot of people who have an age play kink question.
Well, I mean, the way society as a whole tends to look at age play is, I've seen people say that it's legal pedophilia. It's like they absolutely they want to do things with children, so they get an adult who will act like a child so that they can fulfill that need without actually breaking the law.
So the thing is I'm sure there are people in the age play community who are that way, but the overwhelming majority of us want nothing to do with children, because children do not belong in kink. Children are not, a part of the kink lifestyle. They shouldn't be, and they're not. I absolutely hate, when people say it's legal pedophilia or diet pedophilia. Like, no, you can't use, sexual, like, CSA language for something that happens between adults. Like, if it's between adults, two or more consenting adults, how is it pedophilia? They're adults.
I agree.
I'm sorry, I just get super passionate about this because, I've been called a pedophile myself, and, that doesn't make it easy when, you're trying to accept a kink and everyone tells you, that the way you feel, this taboo kink isn't good. And, like, for me, it's a trauma kink. I use it to cope with trauma. And so to be told that, like, I'm a bad person for coping with my trauma isn't fun, to say the least.
Oh, believe me, I understand, being judged for your kink. I'm a furry. So I get the cries of, oh, that's bestiality. No, it's really not.
Yeah, my partner is also a furry, and, he from what I can tell, he hasn't experienced that too much, but, he's not part of the furry community too much. It's more just, interactions between him and I. But with, being told, consensual kinks aren't unethical. If you're consenting to a kink, that doesn't mean it's unethical. It's you are an adult who can consent to what you want to do.
Yeah, and I am very big on consent. I will cry it from the rooftops that, like, if I'm going to be involved in anything, I need preferably enthusiastic consent, just to make absolutely sure that I'm not going to think I'm doing something right and be like, well, I didn't want that. Oh, okay, well.
Exactly.
Because once trust is broken, then it breaks the whole dynamic, and it's hard to get it back, and it's just no fun anymore.
Yeah. I'm also a part of a lot of, Facebook groups, and I was talking about, being a sexual little, and how it's even other littles can sometimes be like get squicked out by it and be like, oh, they don't, like, oh, you're a sexual little, like, that's not right, kind of thing. And, like, there's an actual name for sexual littles. It's called a darkling, and I love that name. I think it's the cutest thing, and it makes me feel like I have a name for myself. I have a label.
Some people have the cool nicknames, and we're just like, I'm just a furry, So if somebody were, like, thinking that they might be interested in age play, they've heard about it and they're like, well, maybe. Would you have any kind of advice that you could give, or that you would want to give, to help ease them into it so they don't get scared away by the stigma that society's put on it?
Well, I think explaining to them, why they might be sexual in that headspace could help. People might be sexual in that headspace because they have a corruption kink. They want to be, the sweet, innocent person who gets corrupted by the big bad person, that kind of thing. It can offer them a space to have control over trauma, like it does for me. I think we need to educate people, not vilify them for something that, you know, they can't necessarily control. I mean, you don't control what you like. You just can't.
Absolutely. And that's why I have the show, because education, and as long as we're all, communicating about everything, people will start to understand.
Exactly. I think it's important to remind people that if you're a consenting adult, what you do with, you know, another consenting adult isn't a bad thing because you're with other adults. And I think a lot of people, you know, that's why they get the whole, oh, it's diet pedophilia. And it can't be. If I'm an adult consenting with another adult, you know, that's all it is. It's two adults role playing. And I think people need to recognize that. I think, you know, people who are who want to explore this kink, you know, I think they should go for it because, you know, it might turn into something wonderful for them. And I know it has helped me overcome some of my trauma. But, you know, I also am hoping to start therapy soon with a kink positive specialist. So we'll see how that goes.
It's good that there is kink positive therapy, because I know that for a good long while, anytime some kink or fetish was brought up in like therapy sessions, it was like, well, we got to work on getting rid of that first. And
Right.
sometimes that kink or fetish is like your biggest coping mechanism, like in your case with it dealing with your trauma.
Yeah, it helps me, and it also helps my partner with his trauma. He, you know, has CSA trauma as well. And the interesting thing about trauma is sometimes we take, you know, role reversals whenever we role play out something. So like for him, he is the dominant and I am the sub. He is the, I don't want to say attacker because that's not what it is. He is, because I do mix CNC with age play, so I do participate in dark age play. So he is the quote unquote
The
attacker.
aggressor.
The aggressor, yes, exactly.
Okay. Well, CNC is another one that some people get kind of iffy about.
Yeah, and you know, I've heard from so many survivors saying, you know, this helps me. It helps me, you know, take back that control. It helps me, you know that I could end what was happening at any moment. I could safe word at any moment. And that's the same thing with age play. I can safe word at any moment and know that my dom will stop immediately and go into aftercare.
That's real good. The safe words are important. Like, I have a shirt that I had made. It says "Respect my safe word," and it's like I'll just wear it around wherever. And like I wore it to my kid's baseball game, and people were looking at me like, "How could you wear that?" It's like, what? There's nothing wrong. There are no bad words.
Yeah, I think kink needs to be more mainstream, not in the way that 50 Shades of Grey
Oh,
brought the route.
Jesus.
I hate that so much because, you know, it's not kink, it's abuse. And like I want a legitimate kink. I want legitimate kink to be, you know, taught more. I think, you know, sex education is like so horrible in the United States where I'm from, and you know, people are like, if it's outside of the norm, it's not right, you know.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what happens when the country decides to let the church and get involved in making the laws.
Yeah.
Even though I know for a fact there are quite a few members of the church who are a little more in our mindset than they care to admit.
Oh, for sure. You know they're freaky too. Like people, you know, I had a friend. I was talking to him and I was asking him like, you know, do you have any kinks? And he's like, no. And I couldn't wrap my head around something like that. Like I have so many things that I'm into that, you know, I love to do, choking, orgasm denial, all of that kind of stuff, and he didn't have a single one. And I'm like, how are you not? It just sounds not boring, but it just doesn't sound right. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it's entirely possible that your friend does have some kind of a kink or fetish that they don't quite realize because they haven't allowed themselves to think about it.
That's true. Like I only recently discovered a new kink about myself like a couple of days ago. So like people are, you know, the more you explore, the more you learn about yourself.
Yeah, I was in my mid 30s and I realized I had a foot fetish. So
That's literally one I just discovered.
yeah,
Um,
it was like
not a
I'd heard about it, and I was like, okay, well, I mean, feet aren't bad, but I couldn't see me doing that. And then one day, like we just kind of goofing around, it was like, well, okay, yeah, this is a thing I'm into. Okay,
yeah, it's kind of like a, and people get so weirded out about certain kinks, and it's just like it goes back to consenting adults. If you're a consenting adult, what you do with your partner, with your partners, in your own home, like, doesn't matter.
absolutely. So, are there any kinks that you've heard of that you know, have wanted to try but haven't had the opportunity?
Oh, sensory deprivation. I think that would be a lot of fun. I think, not knowing what's going to happen next is terrifying, but also so arousing at the same time. Like, anything could happen and I wouldn't know what's going to happen.
Well, that sounds like fun. Are there any that you've heard of that you absolutely are hard limits on, or that you've tried before and decided it's just absolutely not for you?
I do have some hard limits. I absolutely will not allow anyone to slap my face. That also stems from trauma, but that's more of something that, like, I also just don't enjoy the idea. It doesn't appeal to me. It makes me anxious. It makes me almost scared. So that's a hard limit of mine.
Yeah, it makes sense. I have a friend who has the same situation with like being spanked. It's like their
Yeah.
partner was like, you know, things were going on, and he gave her a swat, and she was just like, no, none of that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how, trauma affects our kinks, because, like, for some people, it helps them to act out that trauma, and for others it completely makes it worse. And so, and like, for the same person, one thing could be amazing for their trauma, and like a different thing could fuck them up even more.
Yeah, and it's a matter of it's like until you find which side of that line you're on, it could be a really sensitive subject because it's like you don't know until you try, and if it goes bad, it could just really wreck a lot of things psychologically.
Right. And I think that's important to recognize, rack and prick and all of those, like, risk aware, knowing that, like, you might have a bad reaction to something, but willing to try it because you're aware of those risks.
And I imagine it definitely would help to have the right partner because if things go bad, somebody who will be willing to just stop and turn on the care immediately.
Yes.
Is there anything that we didn't get a chance to cover that you wanted to bring up?
I don't think so. I mean, if you've got more questions for me, I'm happy to answer more.
No, you've been pretty informative, and you know, as the questions came up, I just went ahead and asked.
Okay.
But in the future, so some guest that's listening might have a question, so they could always ask me, and I could contact you if that's okay.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So if anybody has any more questions or comments, only positive comments, any any of that bullshit hate is gonna get stopped at me. It's not getting through, so don't even try it. This is a safe space. I know it's a dirty word these days, you know, safe spaces and snowflakes and all that bullshit, but this is a safe space, plain and simple. It's been wonderful getting to talk to you.
You as well. I've had fun.
I try to keep things, you know, casual so that you know the conversation flows. Because if it gets too clinical, then sometimes people will kind of lock up.
Right.
It's like, how do I say this professionally? And it's like, just say it. It's fine.
Yeah,
That's why I have editing stuff.
exactly.
As I said, if anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to contact me. Twitter, Facebook. I'm working on getting an Instagram. Email ludiversepodcast@gmail.com. I'm easy to get a hold of. Until next time, just keep communicating, keep each other safe, and remember to have fun. Bye.
Bye.
The Ludiverse is sponsored by the House of Algos. Go to gumroad.com/House of Algos for a wide number of recorded classes on BDSM topics, including mindfucking, negotiation, knife play, fire play, flogging, whips, developing your dom or sub side, finding play partners, and much more. And use discount code COMMUNICATE, COMMUNICATE, for 10% off of any purchase. That's House of Algos, HOUSEOFALGOS.
Thank you for listening to Ludiverse. If you have any questions or comments, contact us on Twitter or Facebook. Just search for the Ludiverse. Remember to rate and review wherever you listen. If you want to help support the show, please consider donating to our Patreon.